Legal Aid Committee of Government Law College has always been striving to make effort to connect those who cannot access legal services for some reasons, and to lawyers who are always willing to give pro bono services. But apart from this, the committee has also made various efforts to motivate and encourage young budding students and lawyers to take up various initiatives and enhance their legal social responsibility and their legal skills as well. Keeping in mind these initiatives, we are organizing the intellectual property law webinar today. Uh, as we all know, intellectual property law is something which is very fast pacing, and there are a very few experts of intellectual property law in our country, one of which is our speaker who has joined us today. So without further ado, I would like to open the floor for Mr. Bhandare. And if you have any comments or questions for the speaker, kindly mention it in the chat box. We'll take it after the end of the webinar. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deepanya. Well, it's slightly a peculiar situation for me because I was once part of GLC, right? So I remember during those days, my former boss, Mr. Tempton Daruwala, was in the forefront of teaching us intellectual property law. So it's quite a touching moment for me to be here and speaking to you guys. And I owe a lot to GLC, I must say, because things changed after I moved from my place in Dadar, where I've done all my schooling in colleges which are around this area. And I moved to GLC rather than going to, say, New Law College, which was in the vicinity where I stayed. So several memories which are etched, be it in the canteen, having that keema pav, the burji, which used to be served, or have the bun maska outside. I'm not sure whether you have it now, but lots of memories which are still there, even in the library. So this is my favorite subject because I've taken this up, and I'll take you through why I took this up, and whether you should be taking it up or not, depending on how you intend to take your career ahead in relation to intellectual property law. I'll just try to share the screen.
Okay.
Just a minute. Even have you activated that share screen thing?
Yes, sir. Just let me check one second.
Yeah.
Are you able to share it now?
Just no, it just says host disabled participants.
Just
yeah.
I would like to request volunteers who are organizing the meeting to allow Mr. Bhandare to share the screen.
Yeah.
Yes, is it okay? Okay, yes.
You're able to see this, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So before we actually get into the career prospects and what all goes in IP laws as a career, just a quick. I think probably can the audience put the mic on mute, please? I think there's some background noise.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Please mute yourself.
Yeah.
Yes. We have muted the audience upon entry, but if there is anyone who has been left, please mute yourself.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah. So what are IP laws? I won't get into the definitions which you typically get in the Bare Acts or whatever. It's basically a category of intangible rights protecting commercially valuable products of human intellect. Now, what are these? Just to have a quick snapshot, we usually give this example of a camera to put forth what are the different forms of intellectual property as such. So in a camera, you would see that there is a drawing of the camera which would enjoy copyright in the artistic work. I
Okay.
still hear some background noise, sorry.
I kindly request all the participants to mute yourself. We have muted most of the participants. If someone is left, please mute yourself. I think it's Mehendi Mazumdar. Can you please mute yourself, or volunteers, please mute everyone who has not been. Thank you.
I think it is Saroja Tanglekar.
So you can mute them or then remove them from the meeting, whosoever is not muted. Sorry for the delay, Mr. Speaker. It's a technical.
No, that's not a problem. Don't worry. I've been guilty of it once, so no problem. I understand.
Diksha, can you mute everyone, or whosoever is not muted, can you please remove them from the meeting?
Yeah, I think it's better now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so what you see here is you have the camera in front of you. Now, what is copyright? Copyright is basically the artistic work or the drawing which you would have for the camera. That's the copyright bit. Of course, there are other aspects to copyright as well, like cinematographic films, literary work, dramatic works, photographs, etc., etc. But this is just to give you an example of this. Then you also have the integrated circuit, which is built into this camera, which is the Semiconductor and Integrated Circuits Act, which is again an IP provision. You have the functional elements of the camera, say the lens, the rotatable display, etc., which are inventions which are protected under patent law. Then you have the Nikon logo and the device mark, which you see, and the word Nikon, which is the trademark within this camera, which is again an intellectual property law. Then you have the shape of the camera, which is a design protection which you have under Indian laws. So these are the various forms of intellectual property laws which you typically see in your day-to-day life. Now, there are other forms as well that you would see this Puneri Pagdi or the Rasgulla here, which is a geographical indication which is protected in relation to a certain association or a certain territory where these things originate from and are quite peculiar to that particular area. So that's geographical indications which also gets registration. Then you have plant varieties. So you must have heard about the Pepsi Lays case where Pepsi happened to file actions against Gujarat farmers for using a certain potato variety, which was registered under the plant variety registration by Pepsi. More national oriented aspects you would find in the Biodiversity Act, where India protects its own biodiversity by not permitting us to take it from India. Or the Meko case are quite famous for this, that foreigners taking the Indian biodiversity and using it for their own benefit abroad. So there are stringent laws now in place, which comes within the intellectual property purview. So that's just general overview of what you generally see in IP laws. And this would be basically the flavor for your career, which we speak further. Now, these are the various acts which are which basically protect intellectual property: Patents Act, Geographical Indications Act, Trademarks Act, Copyright Act. You do have a statutory protection for trade secrets and know-how, which are basically non-patentable inventions, or maybe know-how could very well be something which is not patented, but you would still prefer to keep it under secrecy provisions. Or confidential information for that matter. These aspects are provided by contractual protections. We do not have any statutory protections for these. The rest all are statutory protections which you get. Just a quick snapshot of what are the different protections which you see for the IP, typical IP laws. For trademark, registration is optional, but once you register the trademark, you get additional rights through a trademark registration. Copyright registration is again optional, but here you do not get any additional rights after registration. And in most cases, copyright registration is not obtained. For patent and design, registration is mandatory. So there is nothing like a common law patent or a common law design. Yes, you may have passing off for design, but to get a statutory right in a patent and a design, you need to register it. Different tenures for each intellectual property. Trademarks is 10 years, but it is renewable in perpetuity. Copyright, usually it is for life of the author plus 60 years. For patents, it's 20 years, and for designs, it's 10 years and renewable for 5 more years thereafter. After that, it falls in the public domain. Territorial scope as such, typically only India. But in case of trademarks, you have a concept called as trans-border reputation, where a well-known mark outside India could also enjoy rights in India through common law provisions. Similarly, for copyright, through the likes of Berne Convention and Universal Copyright Convention, you get international protection being a signatory to these conventions and treaties without having a registration in a particular country. For patent, again, there are global procedures which have been aligned so that all countries benefit. Amongst them is Paris Convention, Patent Cooperation Treaty, which allows you to globally register your patents by designating the same patent application in a particular jurisdiction, which is part of the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Timelines as such, registrations, you have it within 1 or 2 years in most cases. In patents, it would be slightly higher.
Okay.
Now getting into the career decisions as such, and I've just tried to list down what I have faced when I was in GLC. I'm a first generation lawyer, so I didn't have any background of law as such, where to get in, how to apply for jobs, so on and so forth. And my family was dependent on me settling down and supporting the family. So just try to list down what probably most of you may be going through. Happy to hear from you at the end of the presentation if there's anything else which affects your decisions. But generally, you would have, you will start off with a passion or liking for a particular legal practice area, or some form of law which fascinates you and you want to do that or practice that going forward. Now, with the advent of non-litigation work like transactions, contractual work coming into play, you no longer have that old practice of only doing litigation, which is where the money wasn't there and only few people got opportunities to do law. And it was almost as if, at least during our times, we somehow were castigated as if to say that, okay, you didn't have any other option, that's why you've got into law. Monetary aspects, yes, you need a good salary, and it could either be for material benefits and peer pressure, where you see that your seniors are wearing those brown shoes, brown belts, carrying fancy Mont Blanc pens, or you have a certain other sufficiency requirement where you want to support your family. Now, I've seen that right now material benefits have taken center stage because lawyers have tend to be flashy, the likes of Harvey Specter, etc. Things happen to control certain aspects more than the law. You have the peripheral aspects which attracts a certain law school student to get into a larger firm, to show that as a status symbol, I'm working with CAM, I'm working with SAM, I'm working with a KCO, I'm working with AZB. It's almost that passion which I've listed first goes down to more of a status symbol, which is now being looked at. Another aspect which you see is the gestation period to settle down. So if I had to support my family, I wouldn't have the time to actually hunt for a chamber, ask a senior counsel that, okay, he should let me in and allow me to work in his chambers, because I didn't have any background as such. I had to earn money, so I had to work in a firm. So that's another factor which is usually considered by any law student, that I basically want to work and earn money out of this because I need to settle down. Work-life balance. Now, with all the concepts of well-being, etc., coming into play, and work-life balance, especially in the electronic age, in work from home culture, you've seen a lot of emphasis on work-life balance, where top firms are criticized for the kind of stress levels which a law student has to go through, or an associate has to go through, because of the demanding jobs which are there. So certain law students take a decision not to work in the law firm, and they rather work in-house so that they have work-life balance. And the last one, and which is the most important one, I would say, and specifically for the committee for which we are having this presentation, is public good and social cause. So I know one of our colleagues who was there in the litigation team, and I'm quite proud of her, that she left the practice to get into human rights and the legal aspects of it, and which did not have any monetary aspects, did not have any material benefits associated, but she was able to take that decision for public good and social cause. So this is what I usually see, that these factors usually affect career decisions when you have to get in. These days, as I told you, it's more of working in a big firm and getting that money, which most of you may be having a thinking towards it. What are the prospects in legal field which eventually decide on these career decisions? You have arguing counsel in courts, and as I told you, you have to join a chamber, and you need someone whom you know there to get in, or you need to be extraordinary to get in. Working in top corporate firms as part of the corporate practice, which is quite demanding, as you would know from many people. Then in working in a corporate firm, but for other practices like I do, I'm in a corporate firm, but I work for the intellectual property practice, which is what my liking was, and I have taken that call to take that practice ahead. Third is working in a mid-sized law firm specialized in a specific field of law. So in this case, you would have a certain boutique firm which would only deal with a specific area of law and is known for that area of law. And my personal thought is that one should start off with such firms so that they can build on the nuances. They get time to research, they get time to read the case laws, they know the grassroots, including smaller aspects. Like when I started off with Mr. Daruwala's office, I didn't have any clue as to how to file a paper. So I started punching that paper, and I soon realized that a punch machine was not specific enough to give me those punch holes that I could file that paper in the file. So I was taught that just fold the paper, get the crease, and then punch it, or go and watch the litigation boards in the High Court. Now these smaller things have eventually helped me being street smart in knowing certain aspects which probably a fresher of today's era may not learn. I could have straight away gone into a larger law firm. Obviously, if I would have got that opportunity, but probably I wouldn't have learned these smaller things, which otherwise are taught in mid-size or small-size firms, where you have to do everything. And that's where I think, as a lawyer, one needs to build their career thinking about these small things and being street smart about each and every aspect, knowing the court clerks, because during our times, court clerks were more arrogant than an associate because they had more knowledge than a fresher would have. So start off with something which is where you can learn the grassroots first, and then you step into a larger firm, would be my suggestion. Then working with a firm lawyer whose area of operation is in locality. So typically these are family lawyers. I would say that you would find them close to your house, who do say transfer of property matters, or say conveyancing, or say matrimonial laws. And some of the law students prefer working in such a setup rather than working in a larger law firm. You also have the criminal practice. Of course, it's a fantastic practice, but it comes with its own set of issues, which obviously a civil lawyer also has to go through, but it depends on which side you want to be. You also have hybrid lawyers, where the likes of the Maharashtra Institute of Labor Studies and a law degree help you have a career in, say, HR and law as such. You have a company secretary plus a law degree, which can help you working in-house. You have science degree and a patent law going hand in hand for having a career in patent law as such. So these are hybrid lawyers, as you see. You have foreign firms also, but going directly to a foreign firm is difficult. They need some experience to begin with. And obviously, then you have the in-house practice, which is working in a company. And you're on the other side of the table where you have to rely on other lawyers. And then there is policy making and government offices left. Now, what are the factors which help your career as such? Well, you must have heard a lot about national law schools. I'm biased towards GLC, I must tell you. I have no particular liking as such for national law schools, but let's face it, when I think back, I used to bunk lectures. I never attended all the required attendance which was there for all the important guest lectures. I've never attended, and I'm not trying to propagate that. And that's something which I regret doing when I was in GLC. But National Law School, let's face it, that they have a very exhaustive sort of curriculum. You need to debate, you need to participate in moot courts, you need to attend all the lectures. It's law, constant law, which you have to face. And obviously, they tend to enjoy more mileage in terms of colleges such as our college, which is GLC. So I think somewhere, whatever regrets I had, I think that's something which I would have liked to change, that I would have been serious from day one, which I wasn't, which you guys can think of doing in your present setup. Having said that, I won't say all firms only go for national law schools. I personally prefer government law college students, or say students from Bombay for that matter, because there is a certain tendency to evolve from wherever you come from as compared to a national law school. Like I told you about pacing career, that you need to start with a boutique firm with an eye on joining a big firm later. That's what I did. If I would have started with a full service firm to begin with, full service firm would expect you to probably deliver the job or deliver a particular mandate without actually having time to say research on it, because there you're expected to know certain things. Whereas in a smaller setup, you get time to research, you get time to read the case laws, prepare a proper note without being worried about how do I enter this time, and which is not a billable time. So maybe a few years to begin with in a smaller firm which is known in that particular area, and you become an expert there, and then jump to a larger firm. Solicitor tag, I think that's been a favorite for GLC students. But somehow after National Law School, I think there has been a certain dip. But if you want to make a mark, I would say solicitor is a program which, if you go through it, will give you that kind of mileage and that additional knowledge which is required under a Bombay practice as such. Obviously, but if you intend to just practice corporate law, or say do something which is not related to the curriculum of solicitor, then you would have to take a call whether to do that course or not. Like I had to drop out because I had to support my family, and I had to earn more. So I had to leave the solicitors thing. So these factors are very important, that where do you stand? Do you have the time to go through that entire gestation period, to complete solicitors, spend that 3 years doing articleship, just being paid by way of a stipend and not getting the entire salary? These things always confuse students as to what should I do. I would say that it all depends on how you want to pace your career, whether you are in requirement of money to begin with from day one, then obviously it's probably solicitors may not make sense, because you don't get the money which is there immediately. Similarly, with chambers of a well-known counsel, very difficult to get in unless you have, which I've listed, a godfather or some influence. I'm sorry to say, but that's how it works. Unless you know someone, you don't get in. Again, the gestation period to start counsel practice is quite longish. You have to depend on your senior counsel to get you that brief. And if money is not flowing in, again, that creates a problem in your decision making, unless money is not the entire thing which you're looking at, which is the right thing to do actually. But somehow things don't happen the way they should be. You also have a focused tribunal related career, where a particular lawyer would say only decide to work with a counsel or a lawyer who's focused on, say, debt recovery tribunal, or say trademark registry, or say any IP related tribunal as such, and you would focus on those areas. You also have the option to choose newer practice areas since others are crowded. Now, that was one of the things which prompted me to go for IP law, because I knew that I was an average student when it came to my academics. So I had to do something where, because see, let's face it, because of the population we have in India, for each place there would be at least say 50 persons who are vying for that same spot. And if you're not up, say if you're not extraordinary, you would end up, you may have a liking for a particular legal a certain practice area, but you won't have the place to take you in. So you rather choose as a practical measure an area of law which is not crowded. Now, for example, in today's era, intellectual property is very crowded. During our times, it wasn't. So these could be other practical aspects which would help your career to take a decision as to how to go about choosing where you want to be. Then you have moot courts, your college committee work, tracking placements, etc., which also brings you in limelight and which also makes you work on certain legal aspects rather than people like me bunking lectures and not doing anything. So that's something which you need to focus on. And that, again, I'm saying that's a regret which I have, that I haven't done that. I've seen my friends being active in moot courts or in committee work, and they used to research, they were on top of all the case laws, where I missed out. And where as a student, I think somewhere you need to take up that decision. Yes, you may feel, oh, it doesn't help. Eventually I have to work, I'll pick it up. But the next employer which you're thinking of joining may very well consider these aspects. And the people who have worked for this throughout their time in college obviously stand to have a better chance because they know much better than you, rather than I enjoying the burji pav in the canteen. So that's something which you need to consider, and I would urge that everyone participates in these things. I spoke about Godfather. Then there are also careers which are dependent on languages. So I've seen Marathi language being known, or a favorite amongst real estate lawyers, where the Satbara extracts, which you see in the property matters, are all written in Marathi. So it's important that that lawyer knows Marathi to get that job. Similarly, if you are wanting to practice in, say, Gujarat, and if the state documents are in Gujarati, someone may stand a better chance to do real estate practice in Gujarat because all the documents are in Gujarati. So this is another form, because I've known certain firms who have specifically sought Marathi as a preferred thing for doing real estate practice. We have also seen sincerity and brilliance being pitted against each other. So we see sincere students and we also see brilliant students. But at times, brilliant students have a certain amount of overconfidence, or they don't apply that brilliance while practicing law. Meaning it's all, you see that, okay, that person knows a lot, but when you expect that person to actually sit at one place and spend those 3 to 4 hours drafting the document, that sincerity is missing. So at times when we have to recruit, we also give emphasis on sincerity rather than brilliance. So that's something which one needs to consider, that merely having that air that, okay, I have excelled in certain moot courts, I know certain people, or I know certain things more than a sincere student, may not be the only factor which would get you that job or would help you in your career. You also need to sincerely sit there and finish your job or that draft, so that your counsel whom you're working with, or the law firm you're working with, has that confidence that he or she would complete that particular. Choosing foreign degree over spending time working in a firm. Now, maybe I'm biased towards it, but I've seen many students actually going abroad for doing that 1-year LLM to UK, which is basically an educational tourism for United Kingdom. Most of the law firms would cut short your work ex by that 1 year and would give your batchmate a higher promotion because your 1 year work ex less, because you have gone for LLM. So one needs to remember that, and also understand that whatever specializations and fancy things you may work on as a dissertation in the LLM degree, say in United Kingdom, eventually you're not getting a job in United Kingdom because they are not allowing Indian lawyers to work, and which is a huge fight which is ongoing to have reciprocal arrangements, which does not exist. So eventually you're back in India practicing the same Indian law. You rather work in a law firm and spend that time there. Of course, I've heard funnier stories also. Like one of my friends remarked, "No, I've always stayed in a cocooned environment. So I just want to test myself how I fare alone going somewhere." I said, "Oh, fine. For that particular reason, you want to spend your parents' money and go and just do your LLM there. You very well just go and stay in a normal hotel and spend the same money rather than spending on education." So there are these aspects also which we have seen, that someone wants to study LLM because they haven't stayed abroad or not stayed alone away from their family. Well, that will not help you in your work experience and in your promotions going ahead. Now, coming to practice areas in intellectual property practice. So several of them. So you have the intellectual property prosecution practice or the registration work. So when you have to register patents, the trademarks, copyrights, etc., that's something which most of the IP firms would be dealing in. And that's a bread and butter for any IP practice. So here you have to do prior availability searches, whether a particular trademark is available or not. You may register the trademarks, deal with trademark registry or the patent office, and you may not end up going to courts, etc. That's the first facet of IP practice. Then you have the contentious matters where you work with IP counsel who only specialize in IP law, and you tend to get those IP briefs to begin with. Or you will work in a boutique IP practice who does the paperwork or drafting the plaints, etc., or the pleadings, and you eventually engage a counsel to argue that for you. Again, that is a part of contentious practice of IP area. Then you have the enforcement matters. Now you would question that what is difference between contentious and enforcement? In IP parlance, enforcement is generally associated with criminal actions. So the criminal raids which you carry out, because under copyright and trademark law, you have penal provisions and criminal law implications like imprisonment and fines, etc. Should you infringe on certain IP. So these enforcement practices are also thriving these days, and this is quite a niche area. But for that, you need to be aware of criminal law first to get into this. Patent drafting. Again, I'm not sure whether folks from GLC would benefit from this unless someone has completed their BSc and then come for the 3-year course for completing their law. So with the science background, you can qualify as a patent agent by giving their exam and get into the scientific patent drafting field, which is again a niche area and is quite lucrative when it comes to pay scales if you're a pro in this. Contractual side of IP, which is basically IP centric contracts. But we've seen freshers coming to us and say, "No, sir, we want to do transactional practice. We want to do litigation practice." The issue is that for all these higher level practices, you first need to know other stuff before you practice this. So if I have to do a contract for a contract, I need to know what the stamp duty would be for that IP contract. I need to know how would I draft the arbitration clause in the contract. I also need to know my contract law very well. I can't have a contract without consideration. For instance, I can't say that there is no consideration for this IP assignment. I need to know, I need to at least be aware of taxation laws, that if there is consideration, if there are related parties, transfer pricing issues, I need to ask the client that merely IP centric advice would not help you. You need to engage with a tax lawyer rather than I as an IP counsel simply signing it off and saying that, okay, here is a contract, you can go ahead. I need to write down those things, that check for the stamp duty, check for which jurisdiction you require for having the disputes for this practice or rather for this contract. What are the tax implications? That as a lawyer should strike you. And for that, your grassroots training is very important. You simply can't jump to a transactional practice or a litigation practice without knowing, say, how a trademark is registered or how a patent progresses from, say, a patentability search until grant of a patent, or what are copyrights, what are fair use provisions. Merely reading spicy IP is not good enough. Spicy IP is basically like a glamorous sort of a thing. You find it fascinating to read it, but eventually you end up giving up on your bare act and simply going by the spicy IP versions. Fantastic blog, I must say. There is nothing better than it. But at times it gets you in a wrong habit of simply relying on that rather than checking the bare act. Transactional matters. Now, what are transactional matters? You have mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, where, say, in a merger or sorry, an acquisition, you may want to acquire a certain seller's business in which intellectual property is one of the key aspects, or the brand valuation deals, or it takes the center stage for that entire acquisition. In such a case, IP teams of full service firms are in the forefront in identifying the due diligence issues, whether there are any limitations, conditions imposed on, say, a particular IP which is being attempted to be acquired for. Those aspects need to be checked for. And it's again a fascinating practice, but for this, you need to know your grassroots. You need to learn the registration side of IP. You should know what contentious side of IP is to advise in a transaction, because in a transaction, you would be thrown into the ring with registration documents, litigation documents, IP contracts, everything. So for that, you need to know everything in IP before you step into the transaction world. Media and entertainment practice. So this is predominantly dominated by copyright law because of Bombay being the Bollywood hub. So there are many firms in Mumbai who only practice media law. So the likes of John Doe orders against theater owners or cable TV channels of not running any pirated movies on their cable channels, or probably uploading a link of, say, right now you had the Radhe controversy. I'm not sure whether anyone wanted to see that, but you still had that controversy that that link was uploaded and the pirated version was available. So that's media and entertainment practice. Again, there are content acquisitions where, say, Vodafone, for example, is wants to have a caller tune of a particular movie, which is that song which is very famous. They need to get into a content acquisition agreement, which is what is basically media and entertainment practice, where you have content acquisition contracts, you have say a film title contentious issues. Say a script writer wakes up and says that, okay, my script was stolen by this producer, I need to stop him. So a lot of emphasis on copyright when it comes to media and entertainment practice, and there are specific firms who deal with it and they are very good at it. Advertising law practice. So again, this is a peripheral IP sector, I would say, because you have the likes of disparagement, torts, you have the Advertising Standards Council of India, which is ASCI, having certain rules and regulation, brand endorsement contracts, and Consumer Forum, rather Consumer Protection Act, having certain implications for brand ambassadors. So advertising law, IP is also something which has picked up. Sports law as a practice. So there are several sports lawyers, although there is no law as such, but it's bunch of laws which affect sports law, the sports sector, like the broadcasting field. You would have the intellectual property laws here again. You would have merchandising, several things where lawyers who deal with sports specifically would practice on, say, BCCI contracts, so on and so forth. Technology law, another vast subject where you have regulatory issues and intellectual property laws. And you'll hear these fancy words, I'm a tech lawyer. So when they say that they're tech lawyers, you need to first ensure that is he a tech lawyer only in a particular sector of law like intellectual property law, or does he also know regulatory stuff? So these are the various practice areas which I have seen in my career. which you can consider from an intellectual property perspective. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages getting into intellectual property law? So I think advantages, one of the foremost things is that the laws are uniform globally. Rarely you would see that laws change when it comes to intellectual property law. And they are more of substantive law than procedures, except for registration work, you would have procedures. But otherwise, the substantive law is quite consistent globally. And you have an opportunity to go abroad and work. If you have an additional degree or a diploma there, maybe a foreign law firm may get you in, not United Kingdom, mind you, as I told you earlier. But maybe in US, you go there, you pass a New York bar, or you get into it. You may be in a position to practice intellectual property law as compared to other laws in India, because the principles are the same. Next one is which is where most of the students are pulled towards international law, is the media mileage which intellectual property law gets. You have a big basket going after that another entity, and there was a huge controversy. Oh, how can big basket do this? Why are they being so capitalist about things? So you will see most of the IP decisions being out in the media and being spoken about more than other laws as such. And that's where students generally feel, oh, there's a lot of glamour associated with it, or there is a lot of international recognition which comes along with it. Like even when it comes to lawyer rankings, you would see the maximum rankings are for intellectual property law, and you tend to rub shoulders with international lawyers because international firms also send work into India to register IP in India, and vice versa in Indian, and we also send out work outside. So there's a lot of international synergy which happens in intellectual property law, which you don't find usually in other laws. One of the important things is IP is everywhere and there are long-term prospects. You rarely would find any area where intellectual property is not an important facet. And that's why this field would not be market-driven as such. Even if certain aspects, say during lockdown, probably companies may not register many IPs of theirs, but there would be litigations, and IP litigations would never stop. Or there would be, if a company goes bankrupt, there would be an IP transaction happening somewhere because some other company has more money and will buy that IP. So IP is everywhere. Prospects of working in foreign teams, which I told you, which is only possible probably under intellectual property law and few other laws. The marketing side of intellectual property is very important. If you want to grow in intellectual property law, you need to learn marketing. Merely being a worker at times may not give you that growth. You need to build your books, and you need to have that kind of relations to basically get that growth. Disadvantages: pay scales are lower than corporate practice. You may, and when I say pay scales are lower, you may have your friend who's working in a corporate practice who tends to earn more money than intellectual property practice. And it's a very tough decision at that time. Let me tell you, as a human, anyone would go through that, and there's nothing wrong in feeling that, oh, I'm not being paid that much. But if your focus is clear, that let it be that, okay, I'm not here for money, I'm here for the love of the subject, then there is no better practice than intellectual property law. And I have gone through that situation, so I can tell you firmly that I don't have any regrets doing that. Other disadvantage for IP laws is that if you're working in a IP boutique firm, which is basically doing IP registration work as such, you may be thrown into one area of practice, say doing searches for trademark, or say patentability searches, and you won't get any assistance or any exposure doing the other facets of IP which are included in the entire life cycle of IP. So in that case, you should ideally try to work in firms where you get a holistic sort of exposure, rather than you being thrown into only one area of practice within a particular sector. Say in trademarks, you're only doing trademark oppositions or only doing trademark searches. Yes, those are also important, but try to work in a setup which gives you an overall exposure. Then there is peer pressure to excel when compared to corporate practice, which I told you. There's a lot of gloss which is there, which comes along with corporate practice matters, which probably at times a smaller IP firm may not give you that. Lack of marketing acumen may affect growth, which may not be the case with other practice areas. You obviously you need to build your books, you need to grow eventually, but at times it is also your sincerity in work in other areas which may give you growth, but in IP at times the marketing side is looked at seriously if you have to grow. Well, opportunities are several. We spoke about boutique IP firms where only IP or departmentalized practice is looked at. No transactions or contentious matters here, or maybe contentious matters are there, and you're stuck with one department. But there is a structured form of working. But the structured form of working probably does not help your career. IP teams of full service firms. This setup is my favorite because you get exposure to all facets. Expectations as a lawyer are higher than in a boutique setup. You get transactional IP exposure where you can practice all facets of IP law. However, the disadvantage in such setups is that for most mandates, the deadlines are short. There is lack of time to research because you have to send out a certain thing within a particular timeline, and you end up becoming a finisher rather than learning law. So to reiterate, I would say that work in a smaller setup, get a specialty in that, and then try to go with a lateral hire as in a larger setup. IP counsel, again, I focused IP lit practice. You pace yourself working in with an IP counsel who does only IP matters or predominantly IP matters. But here again, the gestation period is long. For you to get your own clients and to earn money, it is a longest sort of wait which you'll have to undergo. LPOs and BPOs, which is legal process outsourcing and business processing outsourcing companies, not something which I would recommend as a lawyer. This is again, if your salary focus, you want job assurance to begin with in your first year, such aspects could be considered. In-house IP teams are going these days. However, the pay scales are lower, which basically creates a problem for people to get into an in-house team. Maybe you slog yourself and then you join an in-house team at a senior level where you get both sides of the legal practice, the in-house side, and before that, a law firm side. International IP boutique firms. So there are certain specific designations which are part of all the international IP boutique firms, such as trademark administrators, who merely look into trademark deadlines or manage the entire portfolio for renewals, etc. And it's quite a good job, considered to be a good job outside India. In India, we don't have this. But some people have transitioned to that role first working in India. Policy making and government offices, the likes of CPAM, which is again a learning body and which basically is into policy making for the government. I've seen a lot of my friends who have worked there and were quite happy there. You could also work in IP offices as examiners of patents or examiners of trademarks. Enforcement agencies where you work with the investigators, infringement monitoring agencies, etc., and conduct those raids rather, not roads. Then you have the startup advisory, which might be more relevant from the legal ed side of it, because you are eventually helping someone rather than concentrating on the monetary aspect. And then there are IP technology companies, such as there are several IP software companies who have come in to automate intellectual property processes. And you'd be surprised there are many former lawyers who have actually worked on these software and provided these solutions. And they're doing fine in their career. Now some gyan about what would I recommend generally. So these are my observations. Happy to be corrected on this. I would say that you need to decide what you want to eventually practice, whether it's registrations or prosecutions, enforcement, transactions. Remember, all are interlinked and you have to start with basics, as I told you. Use internships to choose different teams practicing different aspects so that you get complete exposure when you have to join a firm or a chamber as an associate or an advocate, or rather a practicing counsel. Once you decide that you have chosen IP as a career, do not get distracted with hefty salaries earned by your friends in corporate practice. You may have the last laugh a few years hence. Right now, IP is not considered to be a lucrative a career as such. But I'm confident that when your generation actually reaps the benefit, I think that time IP would take center stage and it would be a specialized field. Even now, it's a specialized field, but it would enjoy the same amount of monetary benefit or probably pay scales as corporate practice. So you may get the cutting chai from your outside tapri, but you may look at your friend who's working in a corporate practice enjoying that 200 rupees fancy coffee cup, thinking, oh, when would I hold that and when would I afford that? But I'll tell you, the cutting chai brings more joy. That's my thought. Maybe I'm wrong. Be updated with IP jurisprudence. As I told you, mere spicy IP is not good enough. Important to open the BEAR Act, which I failed when I was a student. I'm trying to give that same gyan now, but do that. I have that regret. And also commentaries to support that BEAR Act. Nowadays, old school conservative advice is not preferred. So you cannot be that technical lawyer who talks about, oh, this is how it is legally prevalent, and you need to do this thing in a particular manner so that your advice is legally kosher. That is not what clients want these days. They want innovation in advice. Eventually, sorry to use these words, they'll say, "Mere ko dhanda karna hai." You tell me what. I know about all the technical legal aspects, and there are problems. You find me a legal loophole to tell me how do I do this business in a particular way in a legal manner. So you need to be innovative in your advice. Use simple language while drafting. All the legal maxims, etc., are all good. Somehow I am against those legal maxims. Understand one thing: the judge also needs to understand what you have written. A common person needs to also understand what you have written. The same legal maxim, if explained in common English language, is always better. It's good to learn the legal maxims, no doubt about it. You may try to brag about knowing all those drafting, showing using those non-obstant clauses when not required, trying to use inter alia when rather than using amongst other things. Smaller things which are simple I would say would make you a better lawyer. You would connect more with the lawyer, with your clients and with the judge. So imagine a real estate oriented judge is given an IP assignment, and if you throw those fancy IP lingos at him, he's never going to understand what you're talking in your pleadings. You need to make it simple. Precedents are good, but questioning them is very important. I wouldn't say that you should not use precedents and you should draft on your own every time. Let's face it, everyone uses precedents, but beware of the copy pasting, which usually happens in that. During olden days, you had those solicitors who were put on a pedestal. Oh, he's a solicitor, and the lawyer had to come to the client had to come to the lawyer's office, because solicitor enjoyed that kind of respect, I would say, or that was probably the level at which clients were looking at lawyers. That situation has changed. Clients would expect you to go to their offices. Clients would expect you to come down from that lawyer arrogance which you may have. You may have that after you get that seniority. But if you want to be, if you want to remain in practice, if you want to give that comfort to a client, be grounded. Be grounded. Don't throw that lawyer arrogance or that advocate high court sticker, which is usually pasted onto any vehicle. मैं lawyer हूँ, I'm a lawyer, but there's no great thing which you have done. Eventually, you have to be grounded. And I've seen that being grounded, clients are also happy with you. they are comfortable with you. Of course, there are certain arrogant clients also. You need to handle them in a different manner. But you've not done anything fantastic as such, or you don't change as a human being just because you're a lawyer. And that's what I've realized, that when I'm a lawyer by profession. That's something which I had in my mind. Soon to realize that those things have changed in today's era. Well, that's about it from my side. Any questions? Sorry if I was fast, but I just thought that I won't make it boring after the post-lunch session.
Thank you for a very insightful session. And let me add on that you answered a lot of questions that students are asking us from quite a few days since we have announced this particular session. So we are very glad, and we like how you could connect with us on a student level. We have received a number of questions, but
Sure.
there's one common question which has been asked by a number of students. So I'll take that one first. Students need to know as to become an IP lawyer or to practice in IP law. Does a student with a science background have more advantage rather than a student with a non-science background? And if that is so, if the student doesn't have a science background, should he pursue some kind of academic degree or any course as such to gain that kind of a knowledge to enhance their IP?
Good question.
Yeah.
I'll give you the first answer, which should answer most of the queries. I'm not a science graduate to begin with. Science is only required if you want to practice core patent law. So what I mean by core patent law is that if you're wanting to do patent practice, and if a certain invention related to, say, electronics comes in, and if I don't have the electronics or the science background to understand the technology, I would not be in a position to draft that patent. But does that mean that it's the end of the world? The answer is no. You have trademarks, you have copyrights, you have designs, and even in patents, you can practice the substantive law or the non-technical side of patent law, for which you don't require science background, because you can leave it to the scientific experts to file their expert evidence affidavits, and the lawyer can simply argue on the legal aspects. But a lawyer should, if a lawyer without a science background intends to get into patent law, I would say don't do that. But
Okay.
he or she should do more of trademarks, copyrights, or designs, and maybe practice patents only on the substantive law bit and not on the technical side.
Okay, that helps answer the question. Thank you so much for that. Moving on to our next aspect of our question. It has been a general observation when we talk about a global ranking of intellectual property law and legal services. India is still striving to make a mark. But on the other hand, a lot of outsourcing work has been done by Indians, and a lot of foreign companies prefer to outsource work regarding intellectual property law, for that matter, from India. So where do you think are we lacking? And is there an academic loophole, so not a loophole, but an academic area where we are lacking right now in this particular aspect?
Well, I would say that one should not get fazed by the rankings as such, because let's face it, these rankings are done by developed nations. Now, to have stringent IP laws or the expectations of all the capitalist countries for a country like India, it's impossible. And obviously, they are going to rate you because you have not followed their lobbying practice. So imagine right now, if India is going through a pandemic, and if Pfizer, which is driving, say, for example, I'm not trying to have a blame game here, just as an example, if Pfizer tries to drive the US government to say that ensure that we get all the protection and there should not be any compulsory licensing in India.
Okay.
Obviously, the capitalist countries would put India in the lower ranks in the IP index, but that is something which India requires. Just because we are lower in that index does not mean that that is the right thing or the right projection for India as such. Yes, there are issues that, let's face it, we are the biggest Andu Maliks around. Even as kids or even as in college, we would tend to rip a particular CD, copy, take it home. So that sort of awareness in IP should begin during your formative years. And that's where, if that awareness builds from your childhood, I think the country also would be more IP efficient and increase the
Okay.
rankings as such. I hope I've answered the question, or just ended up giving yeah.
Yes, we have a follow-up question on this. So, do you think these rankings affect the business, IP law business in India, because people pay a lot of attention to these rankings?
Well, I don't think so. It affects to a substantial extent. If a capitalist country or a capitalist company sees revenue coming from Indian business, irrespective of the rankings they're going to invest. Despite all these rankings, you've seen the number of foreign players who have come in and set up shop in India. Yes, they are not happy with certain procedures, but I don't think so. It affects to a greater extent. Earlier, it did. Like pre 1991. Your IP laws were not akin to what foreign players would require. That's why you would in the IP setup you would see co-branding such as Leher Pepsi, or you would see Modi Xerox, where Pepsi was not allowed to have their unilateral presence in India without having a Leher along with it. Now that was something which was not beneficial for foreign players. And yes, that I would say Indian economy was not in parity with, or the Indian regulations were not in parity with the foreign law. But I don't think so. That's the situation now. Yes, there are changes, but it's not as bad as it has been projected to be.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question for you. We have talked on length as to the salary disparity between IP lawyers and lawyers practicing in other areas in corporate firms. And this has been a major area of concern for a lot of students. We would like to understand as to why is this disparity that exists, and what is the primary reason for this disparity?
Well, the simple answer to that is that if I'm working on a mandate, on an IP mandate, if it fetches me 100 rupees, but if the same time the corporate practice fetches say 600 rupees, obviously corporate practice would tend to distribute that 600 rupees rather than 100 rupees. So corporate practice usually charges on hourly basis, and the people who are usually paying those fees are business folks, and they are in a better position to approve higher fees as compared to say an IP team working in an in-house setup. So in an in-house setup, the IP team working in a company would obviously would say, "Arey, ये तो search है, इसका मैं भी कर सकता हूँ." In a corporate setup, the business guys take call on say mergers, acquisitions, and approving those fees, and they are not worried about the fees. So it's basically the disparity starts there itself on the fee structure, which a corporate setup may earn as compared to an IP setup.
Okay, that answers our question quite quite a depth, I would say. Thank you.
Yeah.
I would take the last question for the webinar. We had a lot of questions, but due to lack of time, we would take a last question. This is a twofold question, and we are mixing two questions from two different students. So one student is asking,
A few examples also on this. My English wasn't great to begin with. I have studied in an English medium school, but all the medium of communication in our school was Marathi. Let me tell you that. My mother is an English teacher, but I haven't impressed her any time during her teaching because my English was atrocious to begin with. But she forced me to read all the newspapers, the novels, which obviously I felt was a drag at that time, but it has helped me to basically learn new languages as such. So I won't say English is something which is the ultimate thing which you need to know, but unfortunately, that's something which is looked into by most firms. Now, a second example, which is more, it's quite motivating, and we had a resource in our earlier firm. I used to work for a mid-sized firm. He came from a vernacular language. He studied his law by translating English, the books which he was studying from English to Marathi, because he wasn't able to study it properly because of his limitation for language. Him a job in a top he shows all the fancy lawyers which you see all trying to show off with all material. His English improved. He progressed in his career. He reached a higher position despite having all these limitations. So it's on you to ensure that you don't feel let down by your limitation of your language. Don't feel ridiculed by, say, if someone knows English, he or she tries to ridicule you. Oh, nahi aata English. How does he speak? He doesn't have the polish to speak, etc., etc. One should not get bogged down by that. Ensure that you spend time with such people so that you learn new words, you increase your vocabulary. There is never a stop to learning as such. And obviously read newspapers, because that's where I have learned or picked up on certain English words which otherwise I wouldn't have thought of, in what context these need to be used for. Try to also have substitute simple English words rather than trying to use fancy English words. Try to use simple words so that you pronounce as such. Now, these are the workarounds which a person should get into, and I have done it myself, and I have no qualms about admitting that. So there is hope. Don't just give up that, okay, now where do I stand? Or I should just get into criminal practice because that's where Marathi or say a local language is considered to be more prevalent than English. Don't give up on that. You can rub shoulders. Remember, Chinese are ruling the world without knowing English. Understand about Japanese also. This is this Indian, sorry to say, but idiotic mentality of judging the person from knowing English, and see how the pronunciation he or she uses. Don't get bogged down by that. Just maintain that confidence. Keep that confidence that you will grow and you will learn these words and you would be through.
Okay, that really gives us a lot of hope, and thank you for answering it very honestly. I would also like to draw your attention to the other part of the question, which was if you want to practice international intellectual property law, is there any other language apart from English that can be an asset for a student or help that student in any manner?
So from an IP perspective, I would say German, Japanese, and probably Mandarin would be good, because that's where basically you need to look at countries where you have a lot of work, and what are the industries where which are thriving. And if those are IP centric industries, like Germany is known for technology, Japanese are known for technology, Chinese are known for technology. If you can speak their language, it will do a world of good. Probably you'll do more better than knowing English than knowing these languages. And I know few people who don't know English but know their other languages better, and they are more successful in that field.
Okay, that's very interesting. I would like to take liberty and speak something on a similar topic. When I was in school, I was studying Sanskrit as my optional language. And in Sanskrit, we had a lesson about Dr. Raghunath Mashelkar, who we all know for the famous Basmati rice case. And the reason why the chapter was included in Sanskrit, because he used certain anecdotes in certain books of Sanskrit, and he then later that became useful for the case altogether. So the point that they were trying to make was Sanskrit, if you even think it's a redundant language, it may help you in modern day career perspectives. And that is how I learned how languages can play important role in trademark and IPR and things like that. So certainly knowledge of certain language can play different role in different forms of IPR. one has to be vigilant about where one wants to practice and how to go about it. Thank you so much, Mr. Bhandare, for this very insightful session. I open the floor for Diksha Sharma for vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dipanya. I would like to thank Mr. Shailendra Bhandare on behalf of Legal Aid Committee of GLC Mumbai for taking out his valuable time and imparting such really insightful information through this webinar. I would like to extend my gratitude to our professor in charge, Ms. Shivani ma'am, our General Secretary and Assistant General Secretary Rajvi and Krishna, my co-committee members, my fellow colleagues, and also lastly to the participants who have been such an interactive and patient audience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And
everyone.
feel free to write to me if you have any queries, because see, I've gone through the phase which you guys are presently going into. Feel free to write to me. I may get delayed in answering that question, but I'll certainly make it a point to answer. So feel free to write. Happy to help. And I owe it to JLC, I must.
That is very nice of you. Thanks a lot, sir. Thank you for your time.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, you're saying something. Sorry,
sorry to just interrupt. Actually, I just one question that especially during these times, especially such budding lawyers, even if we are in the second or third year, we're actually looking for internships. And especially when we enter third year, we actually target for top tier one law firms, especially like Khaitan and, and other law firms. So what do you think, is this the right time when we should apply? Or do you think, is it generally viable for fourth year and the fifth years to apply?
I would say second year of 3-year course and fourth year of 5-year course. That's when most of the top tier firms would consider you. Or maybe at the end of the third year of 5-year course also is good. But keep on doing those internships, because see, if the team you're working in gets used to your working style, they would think twice before getting an outside fresher. They would say, "Arey, मैं intern को ही ले लेता हूँ who was working with us, and we'll absorb her in our field or in our setup." So that be efficient. Don't think of it the way this is 1 mahine ka internship and after that I have no connection with it. If you impress the team with your work, they would call you back. And I have done it myself. I have said I want this person to come back because she was fantastic and sincere in whatever she did. So that, don't look at it as a 1 month thing. Look at it that you need to impress, and that is a stepping stone to getting into being absorbed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the participants and everyone who helped for this webinar. With this, we conclude this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.